And you're watching The World with me, Charles Aniegolu. Now, President Trump has said that Venezuela has agreed to use the proceeds from the sale of its oil to buy only American-made goods. In a post on social media, Mr. Trump said such purchases would include agricultural products, medicines, and equipment to improve its energy facilities. The president has also signaled that the U.S. intervention in Venezuela could last for several years, and he refused to commit to a timeline for future elections. In an interview with the New York Times, he said the U.S. would be using Venezuela's vast oil reserves in what he called a very profitable way with the involvement of American companies. Meanwhile, Venezuela's Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, has said 100 people, including civilians, died in the U.S. attack on Saturday that removed President Nicolas Maduro from power. He said Mr. Maduro's wife suffered a head injury as she was seized. And as you may have heard on Arise News, America has seized 2 sanctioned oil tankers linked to Venezuela in back-to-back operations in the North Atlantic and the Caribbean. U.S. forces boarded the Marinara, originally known as the Bella 1, between Iceland and Scotland as it headed towards Russia on Wednesday. The matter is complicated by Russia's involvement. A few days earlier, the tanker switched registration to Russia, and its seizure has prompted an angry response from Moscow.
Hay ahorita mucho maniqueísmo.
There is currently a lot of Manichaeism regarding relations between Venezuela and the United States. The first thing I must say is that there is a stain on our relations that had never occurred in our history, but it must also be highlighted that relations, for example economic and commercial ones between the United States and Venezuela, are neither extraordinary nor regular. 71% of Venezuelan exports are concentrated in 8 countries, and of that 71%, 27% is destined for the United States of North America. Venezuela's economic relations are diversified across different markets around the world, just as our geopolitical relations are diversified, and that is how it should be. It is the right thing to do, to diversify relations, and Venezuela must have relations with all the countries of this hemisphere, just as it must have them with Asia, Africa, the Middle East and Europe.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the author and international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewics. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Laskiewics, for joining us. I understand you were delayed a little by the gremlins of the London Underground tube train system, but I'm glad you're there. We appreciate that very much indeed. Let me start by Russia's reaction to the seizure of that Russian-flagged tanker. Were you surprised by the reaction, given that we're talking here about a Russian-flagged tanker? I mean, it seemed to be rather muted.
It is muted because now Russia is facing a real dilemma. If it attacks USA as a result of this, in any shape or form, apart from this muted response, then the relations between America and Russia will crumble. And Russia is still hoping that America will help in Ukraine. On the other hand, America has shown an extremely high-handed approach to this. America has simply taken this Russian tanker, not given a tinker's down what Russia is going to do. And this is also as a result of the fact that in the action against Venezuela, a great deal of Russian equipment turned out to be absolutely of no use whatsoever to helping the Venezuelans. And as a result, America feels cock-a-hoop. So what we're in now is a situation where Russia has de facto been twice over humiliated, and now depends upon what Putin wants to do to try and recover his prestige.
I mean, I have to say that, I mean, it may sound like I'm making you repeat yourself over and over, but it's in the interest of clarity, because as you yourself have pointed out in the past, I mean, we're in very delicate times. The tone from Moscow has remained particularly low key, hasn't it? Sort of mildly belligerent. I mean, do you think Russia is trying to avoid antagonizing the US or creating the impression that it was going to defend that tanker when in fact it's not?
Yes, there is a problem here. First and foremost, it has been humiliated twice over, this tanker being seized and its equipment failing in Venezuela. It is a blow to Putin's prestige. It shows that America is simply not interested in kowtowing to Russia on this issue. There was indeed a Russian submarine, but Russia decided not to use it. And so the muted response is, A, so as not to antagonize the Russian-American relations further when Ukraine is still possible, and B, they're now working out what to do. It's by no means easy. And that's why the reason was muted, to leave as many options open as possible to the Kremlin. An exact opposite of this is what, for example, Donald Trump has now said to Iran, where he's closed down his options, making it quite clear Ayatollah has to leave. And so if Ayatollah doesn't have to leave, it is a problem for America. Here, the Kremlin has left its hand wide open. What it proposes to do as a result of recent double blows, it's got a wide open field, and there's no hint yet whether it will do anything or what it will do.
And obviously this has to be seen, as you hinted there, in the context of Russia's relationship with Venezuela, where a lot has been happening in the last few days there, and in the context of Mr. Putin's relationship with Donald Trump, which you, of course, mentioned there. And there is no chance, is there, that the Russian president is going to endanger that relationship over a tanker? Because, I mean, his war with Ukraine is much more important, and so is that friendly stance that you talked about from Washington.
Precisely. So there is actually a third reason in all this. What Donald Trump is starting to do is revert to the 1950s policy of brinkmanship, whereby America pressed the issue to its limits each time on the assumption that Russia would do nothing. In the 1950s, Russia didn't, in fact, do anything, and so there was no World War threat until the Cuba crisis. Likewise here, Russia is giving a very muted reply, as it did in the 1950s, to these American actions. An interesting aspect of it is that the action of seizing the Venezuelan tanker with the Russian flag was quite unnecessary. It wasn't going anymore to Venezuela, it was going back to Russia. So why he seized it and in effect tried to provoke Russia is hard to say. It doesn't seem to be any real reason for doing it, except, as I said before, a very high-handed action because he no longer rates Russia as before. So, yes, he is doing this in order to American power, but Russia is muted because she doesn't want to jeopardize the relationship, and because historically it has in fact had muted replies to America's brinkmanship.
So a muted response then from Moscow, even though this was clearly a vessel that had the Russian flag. But I mean, it still raises the question, doesn't it, about whether this incident changes in any way the relationship that Mr. Putin has with Washington at the moment in light of the ongoing talks on Ukraine.
Yes. But the key point is that America, Donald Trump, is now proposing much stronger sanctions against Russia. It would appear that seizing this tanker is exactly in line with what he has stated before, that he is now going to do something more about Russia and increase the sanctions. And therefore, the relationship, as it appears, is breaking down, or to be more exact, Donald Trump is now beetling it off in the other direction of being anti-Russian, whereas not just a few weeks ago he was very pro-Russian. Well, that's America. They do like this unpredictability. And so that is the situation. So the tanker is part and parcel of this. And another aspect, which is quite interesting, is is it legal for that tanker to have been seized? Is another aspect. Because after all, the sanctions were simply stated by America. There's no UN sanctions as such in policy here. It's American policy. And so once again, international law itself is another issue which could be brought up. But either way, a muted response by Russia.
And that's a very good and interesting point that you raised at the end there. But I mean, beyond the Putin administration, I wonder what your assessment of the reaction has been among the Russian populace in general. Because I mean, we've read rather belligerent statements asking how come the Americans are doing this to a ship carrying the Russian flag, and Moscow hasn't even criticized them or pushed back. I mean, is what the Russian people, is what they're seeing realpolitik?
It's slightly more interesting than that. First and foremost, it is hard to be certain quite what the Russians are feeling. Please remember, it is a country under control, with the media under control, and so to be certain precisely what the Russian nation is thinking is a hard job. However, you're quite right that the Russians have responded to the people more than the Kremlin. Actually, this is very good news for Putin. Far from the Russians, therefore, calling for an end to his dictatorship, they want him to go further, which is, of course, interestingly, precisely what I was saying before. In one of my books, I asserted instantly that it could be America that pushes us closer to World War III, and that is actually what's happening now, in fact, which is why World War III is such a nexus. And this reply on the behalf of the Russian people that they would like to see more done pushes us down the road to confrontation. That's the important point. And of course, Putin means that he's in power despite these 2 points, and the people rather blame America than him.
And I think we should all remember to reference those books of yours from time to time, because I think they give a sort of crystal ball look into the future, which is very instructive. Well, let's turn to that other development around Venezuela. President Trump announcing that Venezuela will purchase only American-made products as part of what he called their new oil deal with Washington. Under the plan, Venezuela will turn over millions of barrels of oil to the US, with the proceeds of any sales to be controlled by President Trump himself. Now, just a few weeks ago, this update from Mr. Trump would have seemed shocking before the events of last weekend. But are they now just part of a post-Maduro bilateral relationship, Dr. Laskiewics?
Not a bilateral relationship, it's unilateral. America's dictating the terms, and the Venezuelan president is nothing more than a pawn in their hands. It therefore follows it's up to Venezuela as a nation, because its government is supine in this respect, to decide whether it likes this, what is essentially a colonial empire. Please note that this is very reminiscent of 19th century colonialism, whereby the country which took over a certain area, like, for example, Nigeria by Britain, that will be its colony. It's up to Britain then to decide what Nigeria is to do or not to do. And it's precisely this that America is now doing to Venezuela. The question is whether the Venezuelan people, not the government, I stress, but the people, because the government appears to be in the hands of the Americans, will accept this. It went wrong for the European powers in the 20th century. And the question is, can America do this? Can it get away with it? Please note, no elections for the foreseeable future, all revenues through America's hands. We're now looking at Venezuela as a colony in the hands of President Donald Trump. And the question is, can he run it? Please note, the Americans failed in Vietnam and failed in Afghanistan, but Venezuela's in their backyard. But that has all happened before. France failed in Vietnam too, and then thought Algiers would be a walkover because it was exactly in its backyard, precisely like America, for Venezuela for America, but it also failed. So it's by no means clear that in the long run, President Donald Trump's colony will not actually move against him. And he is, incidentally, increasing number of people who are now, if you like, anti-American, by targeting countries like Colombia, for example, to name another one, and Cuba. So it depends whether Donald Trump can keep up this very strong empire, or whether he might suffer from imperial overstretch.
And we're almost out of time. We appreciate your giving us all that time that you've given us. Just before you go, Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello has said that 100 people were killed in that U.S. military operation, including Mr. Maduro's personal security team, who he said were killed in cold blood. What do you make of that?
Very interesting point. You see, it's hints like this which show that Donald Trump's control over Venezuela isn't a full 100%. Now, the Interior Minister, if he'd been entirely pro-American, would have suppressed this news. By stating it formally and publicly, he has made it clear to the Venezuelans the situation is not good, albeit in a euphemistic way, a roundabout way. And now we yet to see what the Venezuelans will do. But what he stated just now is not from the script that the Venezuelan president would want the Interior Minister to follow.
Dr. Laskiewics, we are in your debt. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Marek Laskiewics is the author and international affairs analyst who's talking to me on the line from